Get started shortly. Waiting for our ASL interpreter. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. Hey y'all, get started shortly. Thanks for joining. Hello, hello. Thanks for joining, y'all. We'll get started shortly. Awesome.
Sorry, I had technical problems before and then it just like shut down.
No worries, no worries. I'm glad you're here. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we're getting ready to invite Deepa to join us. Just wanted to check in to make sure if you have any access needs to please drop something in the chat. My colleague Bernard is monitoring, and we'll try to do our best to follow. But if it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and invite Deepa to join us. Okay, great. Here we go. Deepa!
Hi, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm much better now that I'm able to see you.
That is kind of you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Deepa, for taking some time. I know there's a lot going on in the world. I'm truly blessed to call you a friend and a comrade and a movement mate, a karaoke buddy, and really looking forward to the conversation today, especially because we are celebrating Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It's Gemini season and all of the things. So I'm looking forward to just digging in with you. And thanks everyone for tuning into this next conscious conversation from Can't Stop, Won't Stop Consulting. Before diving in, Deepa has a long bio. So if I read all of Deepa's bio, we would probably not have time for the conversation. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of things and then we'll just dive into questions. Is that okay, Deepa, to kind of just share? I could do a little bragging of some of the things I know about you and your experience.
Absolutely.
Awesome. But so Deepa, in addition to all the things that I just shared, is a South Asian American writer, strategist, lawyer, and racial justice advocate. She is an immigrant who moved to Kentucky from India, where she was when she was 12 and graduated from the University of Notre Dame Law School and Vanderbilt University. She is currently a strategic advisor at the Building Movement Project and is also the director of Solidarity Is. I had the chance to connect with Deepa when she served as executive director of South Asian Americans Leading Together. And also Deepa has held positions at Race Forward, the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, the Asian Pacific American Legal Resource Center, and the Asian American Justice Center. I'm also a big fan of her book, We Too Sing America, South Asian, Arab, Muslim, and Sikh Immigrants Shape Our Multiracial Future, which we'll talk a little bit about during this conversation. And just overall, Deepa is just a bad ass organizer, and so I'm just super excited to call you a friend and comrade. And so thank you, Deepa.
Greg. Thank you. You're so sweet. Thank you.
All right. So if it's okay, Deepa, I just want to just go ahead and dive into some of the questions that we have for you. This is a question that we ask all of our guests on here. So the first question is, in the spirit of ancestor Ella Baker, who are your people?
I love this question. I really do. And it's so great to start by bringing Ella Baker into any space. So I would say that I would answer that question both from like a close-in perspective and a broader perspective. I think that close-in, my community home, my political home is and has always been really in the South Asian American space. People doing multiracial solidarity work are my people. And in terms of, a little bit broader than that, I feel that I really tend to gravitate towards people who have strong convictions about their values and then do as they say they will. People who believe in and don't get kind of afraid of generative conflict, which happens both personally as well as in movement spaces. And people who have really creative ways of thinking about issues and systems change. So those are kind of the folks that I tend to gravitate towards and try to bring into my ecosystem. And you're one of those.
Awesome, Deepa. That's very kind of you. And a lot of that definitely resonates. So it makes me even more excited about kind of digging into some of the topics today. The other question that we ask all of our guests is, when was the last time you felt brave?
Oh my goodness. Sometimes I feel like, we all are dipping into our courage during the pandemic year that we've had, during the year of racial injustice and what we're seeing around the world in places like Palestine. I would say for me personally, I think it's anytime that I write something that's personal and then share it with the world. I think that's the last time I felt brave. I wrote something on Mother's Day and I posted it on Medium. And I think every time you're vulnerable and then you put something out there, there is this sense of, okay, how is it going to be received, right? So it takes a bit of courage, I think, at least for me. I think others can do this very quickly, but for me, I have to draw on some wells of courage to be able to share something that I wrote.
Yeah. I appreciate that, Deepa, because I feel like, especially what I experienced from you and what I at least, one of the things I actually appreciate about you is that I think you find ways to speak the truth, but in a way that's very accessible to folks. And so I appreciate hearing that, you know, in some cases, places you have to find that courage or bravery to be able to do it. But even in the midst of that, and even if it feels that way, I know at least I experience a lot of the things that you say is very truthful, very honest, and also needed and necessary. So thank you for that too.
Thank you.
So the first question I want to ask you, because you talked a little bit about this in terms of your people, but I'm curious if you can share if there's like a story or if there is a pathway that you can talk about in terms of how you what actually brought you to this work, you know, in particular solidarity work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, in the big scheme of things, as an immigrant growing up in Kentucky, it was constantly this experience, I'm sure others can relate, of not knowing whether I belonged and where I belonged. And so questions of belonging and inclusion have always been ones that I've thought about and that have been of interest to me. So I obviously did not know that I would do this work, you know, when I was like in college or even in law school, really. It was a series of serendipitous ways in which I found myself coming into this space. But I would say that, you know, that immigrant background is a huge influence. And then I think another is just understanding, as I went to law school in particular, how inadequate the systems are, you know, whether it's the law or the justice system, and actually attending to the inequities that you see, right? And so wanting to also utilize that system or knowledge of the system in a way to bend it to or to influence it at some level. I think those are a couple of, you know, like reasons why I kind of, you know, connected systems change and Asian American or immigrant community work together, so the personal and the political. But there have been other moments as well. I think that for the solidarity work, a lot of that emerged from the work I did after 9/11 and recognizing that, you know, we could not address a lot of the issues of hate violence and state violence in our own communities, right? And we had to really build bridges. So even the whole idea of Arab, South Asian, Muslim and Sikh communities coming together was a new thing. It was not present after 9/11. But we had to recognize that this wasn't, you know, the state was targeting all of us in somewhat similar ways. We were dealing with bias and discrimination and bullying and profiling in similar ways. So the importance of coming together with different communities emerged as really the most powerful strategy, the most empowering strategy to deal with the situations that we were facing.
Yeah, there's a couple of different threads on this that I kind of want to build off of, and maybe they kind of also relate, because that was one thing that reading your book, the We Too Sing America, I feel like that for me anyways, there are a lot of different examples, stories of folks, particularly South Asian, Arab, Muslim, and Sikh folks who in campaigns and like their own experiences and how they were also impacted or impacted by those different systems. And so I'm curious, can you share a little bit about what inspired you to write the book? And is there and it's, now that it's, you know, been some time, like as more folks are responding to it, reading it, are there any things that people is there anything about how people are reacting to it, or what things that they're learning from it that you feel like maybe were different, or that continue to maybe surprise you as more folks are exploring?
That's a great question. So I wrote the book because of a couple of reasons. One is that it became increasingly clear that narratives were written about post 9/11 America without the input, participation, and experiences of South Asian, Muslim, Arab, Sikh communities. And that secondly, what we were learning, hearing, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's like, you know, in actual articles or in the media, was really a sanitized history of what happened in the weeks and days after 9/11 and even later. And so those two reasons really prompted me to want to actually write this book. And I relied on community stories. It's completely, just as you said, every single chapter in the book is based on a set of community stories of people who, you know, I knew, I interviewed, I spent time with, and then from the story, we move into the policy or the system, and we understand how communities organize to change the system. So each of the chapters really kind of looks at, you know, one of the chapters, for example, and I know, Greg, we have a friend, Eves, who's in the book, in the chapter on immigrant youth. And, you know, Eves is a person who's an undocumented South Asian immigrant who really was one of the first people to speak out about what was happening in terms of the immigration system and how it was targeting families, and really mobilized a campaign of folks around making sure that something changed in terms of the immigration system's orientation towards his case. And so, you know, having seen someone like that find the courage to share their story and to mobilize in the way that they did, and following Eves to like his graduation, and then beyond that, you know, I mean, a lot of the people in the book are family to me and are really important to me personally too. But what I find, you know, I love your question, like as people, you know, discover the book. So I think one of the surprising things is that people are still discovering the book. I did not expect anyone to read the book past a certain point of time. But I think as we come up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, I think there's a renewed interest in learning about community stories and community histories. So I think folks are perhaps turning to the book for that reason. But I think what they're also finding is that, yes, a lot has changed, but there's a lot that has not changed, right? And so how do we grapple with that, right? I mean, obviously, like the organizing landscape looks really different 2 decades since 9/11. And yet, you know, the level of state violence and policies that we experienced around immigration and national security policy coming together still continue to exist in this country. The targets might look different, right? But a lot of these policies were tried out, particularly on the Muslim community. So I think that those are some of the lessons or aha moments that folks are having. But I hope that what folks take away is the power of organizing, the power of coming together with different communities, and the power of thinking about addressing these issues from a systemic standpoint.
Yeah. The other thread, I appreciate that, Deepa. The other thread that I kind of want to bring this in, you know, and it's come up recently in some conversations, but we are an Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. You know, and I know at least when I was at the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, and we were part of, and you were the ED of SALT, as I mentioned, and we were part of the National Council of Asian Pacific Americans. I think there's an ongoing conversation about Asian American identity, and particularly for folks who are South Asian, Southeast Asian, Brown Asians, if you will, like, and what are some of the opportunities, the challenges, that the complexities of being, you know, being Brown Asian, Southeast Asian, South Asians within the broader Asian American identity and umbrella. And so I would love if you could kind of also reflect a little bit upon, you know, I imagine that, like, how did that show up in the post 9/11 work? And how do you, and in what ways do you see things changing or the same, you know, since then, especially as it relates to kind of Asian American community organizing?
Yeah, you know, I think that, you know, I think that it is so true that it is a complicated community, right? And I just did a podcast episode where I interviewed one of our colleagues, Bo Tao Arabe. And Bo has this really great term that she uses in the podcast called complex unity. And I think that's so true, right? I mean, in our community, in the Asian American community, it is really lots of layers of complex unity. We're striving for unity because we believe that together, particularly politically, we stand to win. And we know that's true. We've seen it, right? We strive for unity because there's so many connections and commonalities. in terms of our experiences in this country as immigrants from Asia. But it is supremely complicated because it is a constructed identity, right? And so it doesn't always flow. It doesn't always sort of seem easy. There's a bit of like trying to make it fit. And so absolutely in the post 9/11, world, you saw, and I write about this in the book, that that South Asians, Arabs, Muslims, and Sikhs kind of found a coalition of their own, right? And I think a question that comes up, and it came up then, but I think, even when we reflect, is was it possible for Asian America to hold, that coalition, the AMEMSA coalition, as we often call it, Arab, Middle Eastern, South Asian, Muslim, and I think that, we have to recognize that there is a level of discomfort, I think, that folks have within the Asian American space to think about issues like national security or Islamophobia. I think that the Asian American space comes together more easily when it's like access to rights, access to benefits, or civil rights. But the issues that affected Arab, Muslim, South Asian communities were really seen in the beginning as a national security issue, not a civil rights or racial justice issue. We knew that they were, but we had to like really make them fit into that, right, construct. So I think there was discomfort. Sometimes it worked. Like we have examples of groups like All Deaf in New York City or the Asian Law Caucus in the Bay Area that really started to work with our communities. And then I think there was also a little bit of a, not sure, if this actually fits in the traditional Asian American movement space. So I think it's possible to have multiple identities, multiple formations, and multiple coalitions, right? We have to make space for all of that. But I think it's also important to continually interrogate the complex unity that Bo talks about, and to understand that we might always feel a sense of tension. We might always feel a little bit of a sense of a part of it, but apart from it, that we are, I feel like I negotiate that every day. I feel really drawn to it. And then I'm like, wait, am I really seen here? Right. And I guess I've sort of accepted it as perhaps a daily tension that I'm going to have to deal with if I want to work in the Asian American space.
Yeah, I'm curious, Deepa, because I you talked a lot about your kind of work post 11. I know that we were working together when the shootings in Oak Creek happened.
Right.
And I know you've also, because of those your experiences or dealing with those things, that there's definitely been because of those experiences, you've been a advisor, someone who's kind of supported folks through some of the recent horrific events, the shootings in Atlanta, the shootings in Indianapolis, and whatnot. And so, wanted to just see if you had any reflections on what has changed about the landscape, how you think folks have been able to respond to those recent incidents, and go from there.
Yeah, I think that, unfortunately, right, we're going to see, and we have been seeing these sorts of attacks that in many cases are racially motivated. And part of, I guess, my reflection is that we really need to support like frontline organizations and frontline organizers because they're really tending to so much trauma, right? When there's an act of mass violence in your community, you mentioned the Gurdwara shooting that took place at the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin in 2012, or whether it's something that happened, at a place of work, like we saw with the mass shooting in Atlanta that targeted Asian women, or the FedEx facility that targeted Sikh American workers. The community trauma is really multi-layered, and it lasts for a very long time. So I think that we have to resource frontline organizations and frontline responders who are acting as spokespersons. They are providing mental health services. They're liaising with the media. they're providing support and raising money for victims and survivors and families. There's a whole host of, types of work that happen in response to a community trauma like that. So I think that, this is really sad to say, or hard to say, I think, which is, I think we've developed a muscle to deal with it. We've had to. And it's a horrible thing to, I think, admit that. But so much more still needs to be done in terms of understanding the long-term trauma. It's not like when the media stops talking about it, the community stops feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we resource organizations and organizers who can do a whole range of services in our communities to be able to tend to the sort of individual and collective trauma, is a question that I've thought about for a while, and I think it's still kind of a live question today.
Yeah. That hit when you are like, we've kind of unfortunately built a muscle for it, because in terms of just like the rapid response, and unfortunately there've had to be different like formations stand up in different places where people have kind of had to somewhat, find that balance of addressing the community trauma, but also how do we create space for the staff and for the organizers and the folks who are like having to hold space for those impacted, and then trying to navigate their own experiences as they're trying to like hold organizations and communities and movements. And so I definitely was like, wow, like, that's right. Like, unfortunately, there's actually been too many horrific incidents that we've had to respond to. And so, wow, thank you for kind of just holding space for that. And I'm gonna need to sit with that some more as we're trying to, navigate.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna shift a little bit, because I want to talk a little bit about this project that we worked on together, and you were actually a big part and a leader in helping make it happen. But this week, a project called Solidarity Stories was launched, which is a project of Asian American and Pacific Islander community leaders sharing their stories of solidarity, which is a project of the National Asian American Leaders Table, COVID-19 racism, in particular, the working group on solidarity. And the website is solidaritystories.org, solidaritystories.org. So can you share a little bit, Deepa, with folks about how, like, what was the vision behind this? Why did you feel like this was something that would be helpful, and why is it so important, especially as we are in Heritage Month?
Yeah. Well, Solidarity Stories is a collaborative effort, and one of the people really involved in that collaborative effort, for those who are watching, is Greg. And I think that along with Greg, it was Becky Belcour from NACASAC, and some folks from the Building Movement Project where I work, Katie Hugh and Shelby House and Ali Yee as well. So we kind of came up on this project collectively. And I think the reason was because when folks started to address the rise in anti-Asian hate as a response to like the climate, right, of COVID and the pandemic, it became increasingly clear, just as we talked about, right, that we couldn't do that work just in our communities, that we had to do that work in collaboration with other communities. It also became increasingly clear because at the end of May and June, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd last summer and the uprisings that happened around the country to address racial injustice, it was also clear, right, that Asian Americans were again really looking at how could we dismantle anti-Blackness within our communities and broadly. So I think this theme of solidarity really came up for us as an important one to include as we were addressing the immediate threat of racism. How can we actually build towards solidarity as well? And part of, and I honestly think, Greg, you were one of the people who said this, right? Where you said, well, this is part of what we've always done. And yet we don't always know, right? Our own histories and our own backgrounds. So we set out to collect, we did a storytelling project. So what you'll find if you go to solidaritystories.org is basically a toolkit, and it has a case study of a solidarity story. There is a short video clip from interviews that were done with community leaders. And then there is a discussion guide where folks can actually utilize the information to hold conversations and discussions on solidarity. So it's an opportunity to, one, learn, to two, reflect and discuss, and third, to act. So that's how I kind of see it, right? So when we know what our communities have done and dealt with, then we're able to reflect and discuss with others. And then we're able to take some action steps, maybe the ones that we learn about from those stories. And I think, I think the stories are the key, right? So we have a story, for example, about how Native Hawaiians organized to protest the construction of a telescope on Mauna Kea, which is a really sacred cultural and important revered site, right, for Native Hawaiians. And it's a remarkable story of how Native Hawaiians, and in particular, the person that you talked to, I think Greg Presley, set up a university, right? A way to actually learn from each other, to learn skills, histories, strategies, where people actually built a university, sat together, taught, received information, right? And it's a really, I think, remarkable story of intergenerational solidarity and cross-cultural solidarity for folks to know about. Another example of a story that is in there is actually about the Indo-Caribbean community. So we talked to a group called the Jahaji Sisters from Richmond Hill, New York City, and they really talked about kind of the complexities. And this is the other thing that you'll find in these stories, that folks are really candid and honest about both the possibilities of solidarity, but also like the really hard stuff, right? And so when we talked to the Jahaji sisters, they told us about how South Asians, particularly those who are, coming here post 1960s and who might have been more professional or of a different professional class, look down on Indo-Caribbeans who, came here from places like Guyana and Trinidad. And that building of solidarity between South Asian and Indo-Caribbeans really requires a lot of healing and acknowledgement and repair. So that's an example of the inter-solidarity. So anyway, so there are like 12 different solidarity stories on there for folks to explore. And we hope you'll use it during not just Heritage Month, but throughout the course of your time, right? If you're interested in learning more about solidarity practice in our communities.
Yeah, definitely. This was actually a project that I really enjoyed working on. I mean, anytime I get to work with Deepa, I feel really blessed. But in particular, I felt like at least for me, one of the reasons why this resonated so much is that I feel like one of the narratives that were coming out of the uprisings that Deepa mentioned, and even in some of the recent Stop Asian Hate efforts, was that, Asians were just waking up, or that there was always talk about like efforts of like the anti-Blackness in communities, but not necessarily about efforts where there was solidarity. And I think it was also important for us to interrogate like solidarity within the AAPI umbrella, but also in relation with other people of color communities. And so I think that it's a beautiful collection and a beginning and a strong foundation of stories that for me was very enlightening. Another person that featured is Saraf from the Southeast Asian Freedom Network, and one of the things that they were sharing with me is like, it's so dynamic. Like even since like we did the interview with them, like things have shifted both personally, but also in the world and in like the ecosystems that we are living in. And so how do we continue to create space for ongoing conversation and politicization and sharpening of our analysis? That's also part of the ongoing work of organizing and solidarity building, is that things are dynamic in that way. So Um, Hopefully this is a tool that folks can to expand those conversations, be it introductory or grounding for folks who may be newer to understanding API solidarity,
Mm-hmm.
and also a way to encourage folks to action, to do solidarity themselves, and to dig into it's sometimes tough, but very visionary, and I think heartwarming too, especially as you begin to see those breakthroughs. So thank you, Deepa, for
Absolutely.
your.
It was a great project to work on. It provided a lot of comfort and refuge during the dark moments of this past year.
Absolutely, absolutely. So please check it out, y'all. Solidaritystories.org. Really easy to remember. And thank you to Johnny for being awesome with the ASL interpretation. So thank you.
Hey, Sonny.
Um, All right. So to shift a little bit, Deepa, one of the other things that I know a lot of people know you for, and I'm like starting to use a lot more, is the work you've done around the social change ecosystem map. Um, and so I would love if you can. I know I've been like following your monthly series, and the work, the updated versions of the map that you've been doing, and it's really helped me crystallize like maybe some of my framing of my own role, but also how my relation to other folks that I'm working with. So if for newer folks, or maybe folks who aren't as familiar, can you share an overview of a bit of the ecosystem map, and like what's the importance of this framework, and how has it been how folks use the tool in their work?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Greg. So the social change ecosystem framework is a point of entry for folks who are really trying to get a better sense of how can I be in service to causes, issues, coalitions that I care about, right? And so it's a reflection tool, it's a self-awareness tool for individuals, but it's also a resource for organizations, coalitions, and movements. I don't know if anyone will drop the link, but you can find it at buildingmovement.org or on my link tree in my bio on my Instagram. But what it contains are three sort of components. So one component is really getting aligned in terms of what our core values are as individuals or organizations, right? And that is represented in a circle in the middle. It's a very visual sort of map. And then the second component is to identify the roles that we show up in. There are 10 roles that the map envisions. So they range from visionary and builder to storyteller and weaver. And these are roles that I found that folks usually ended up playing when there were crises in communities that I had observed over the last 20 years of work in movement spaces and nonprofit spaces. And then the third component of the framework is that it is all built on this sense of an ecosystem. So just like, we see so many ecosystems in nature, our body is an ecosystem, social change work is interdependent, right? And it's built on relationships. Not always easy to build, obviously. And so how do we actually think of the work that we do as part of a broader ecosystem? How are we in relationship to other people in that ecosystem? So if you utilize it as an individual, you might answer questions like, is there a role I typically play? And Greg, I'd love to know how you map yourself, right? Like, is there a role you typically play? And is there a role or many roles that you aspire to play? And how do you get there, right? That's a set of awareness tools questions that could come up for you. And if you're an organization using it, you could really think about who else is part of our ecosystem. Are we competing with people in our ecosystem, or are we collaborating with them? How do we deal with generative conflict with others in our ecosystem? So those are some questions that organizations could think about. But I'll pause there and happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, no, I love it. So one thing that I love about the framework is that for me, I think that because I'm also in different spaces, I realize and recognize that depending on the space that I'm in, I may play different types of roles, but there are definitely ones that I feel like I am called to more. So like, some of the ones that I know that I identified at is like the visionary, the builder, and then like disruptor. And it's interesting because sometimes I'm like, sometimes those things could sometimes be at odds with one another. But I guess that's true Gemini form for me though. It's like having like the multiple, like the twins and like the multiple pieces. But I'm curious, like, yeah, so I'm curious if that aligns with how you may experience me, Deepa, in
I
terms
was
of
gonna,
the.
yeah. So I definitely think you're a builder. I mean, I think that you are able to. I mean, you were an executive director. You built this consulting company with like this amazing team of folks that are part of it. So you have that ability to kind of build something that serves a vision by creating those foundational building blocks. I also think you are a visionary and a disruptor, but I would also add actually weaver. I think of you as a weaver often because because when you are in multiple spaces, then you have the ability to understand how things actually connect. And so I've seen you do this often where you'll say, oh, we should bring in, X person to this conference from this other movement space because they're actually grappling with similar issues or concerns, right? So I think I also see you as a weaver because you are a connector as well.
Awesome. And I'm curious, like, how do you, like, I know that is there one that you particularly identify with, Deepa, more, or that you feel, do you find yourself having to play a particular role in different spaces?
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I mean, I think that I have traditionally and typically played the role of a frontline responder. And I'm often called to playing that role, but I'm also very, very keen on shifting from that role and trying to shift myself from that role because it is one of the roles that actually can take, it can take a lot out of you, right? To be a frontline responder. And so I've learned that. And one of the ways that I use this map is to actually check in to see, am I still doing that all the time? But the roles that I feel more called to now are also weaver, as well as a guide. So guiding other frontline responders, for example, rather than being the frontline responder. And that's a way of thinking about how to realign yourself if you use the framework, right? There might be a role that you're tapped out, or maybe you're taking up too much space. And so how can you be a guide to bring others in and use your knowledge and experience to help them kind of wind their journey through. So weaver, guide, frontline responder are all ones that I toy around with. And like you, I'm in different spaces too. So
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely, yeah, I think especially because I know you as such a master facilitator that those roles also make sense in terms of guiding us, whether it's in a meeting or in a process, or even you're really great at, like, especially when you're moderating panels, of like trying to draw themes from things that like different people share. And I that's one of the things I picked up from you, where like I'm trying to sharpen my own skill set, is like, okay, as a moderator, how am I like sharing back out and not only synthesizing but connecting the dots. So I definitely know that of you, and one thing that I definitely try to learn from all the masterful facilitation that I've been able to be a part of and witness through our time being movement.
thank you.
Awesome. I know we have a couple of minutes left. I want to honor the time that we have together, and so maybe before we close, Deepa, I'm curious: are there campaigns or projects that you're currently working on that you would love to lift up to folks, and what are ways people can support you in this moment?
Thank you, Greg. Yes, there are. So one, as we've mentioned here, we really hope you'll go to solidaritystories.org and learn and discuss and use what you can find there. The second the second project that I wanted to mention is something that we're doing at the Building Movement Project, and Solidarity is, which is an internship program where we're placing 15 interns at 15 social justice organizations, paid, of course, internships, and folks will also receive training on solidarity practice. So 18 to 25-year-olds, if you're watching, and if you want to kind of learn about solidarity practice and also be interning at an organization virtually, obviously, this summer, you can find an application form and other details at solidarityis.org. And I just want to shout out my incredible colleague, Anna Castro, who is helming this project. So those are the two that I would lift up.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely want to. I had a chance to work with one of the interns that were part of the program last year, Pebbles, who was an intern Asian Solidarity Collective. Shout out to Pebbles.
Shout out to Pebbles.
And to the rest of the interns. I know that there's lots of great work happening. And Deepa, I know I tell you this, but I want to do it publicly and in front of everyone that you continue to be a light and inspiration. There's so much that you do then behind the scenes that nobody knows about. And so in addition to public facing work that you do, I want everyone to know that Deepa is a core and critical leader of our time right now. And both within the Asian American community, but more broadly too. And so I just wanted to say thank you for just your leadership, your femtorship and guidance, and your friendship and camaraderie. And I'm looking forward to what other good trouble we'll be able to get in the future.
Oh, thank you, Greg. You've always been such like a core source of my support, and a core part of my ecosystem for when things are tough and also when things are joyous. So I'm looking forward to actually spending some time in the karaoke rooms soon enough with you.
Yeah, soon. I already have my list of songs that I want to sing with and without you. So
See, this is why we're friends. Because we both love the mic.
That we do. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Deepa. Please give Ahi and the rest of the other folks my love, and we'll definitely be in touch. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you, Johnny, for being an amazing interpreter for our time together today.
Thank you, Johnny, and thank you to your team and to you, Greg.
Awesome.
Bye.